So there's a product that originally was announced, I believe, on April Fool's Day, and it's kind of evolved now into an actual product that is going to come to market. And in fact, it's going to be coming to market pretty soon, to the point where pricing details appear to be leaking, and they're certainly getting people interested in this device. And to me, it really makes me excited for the future of just handheld gaming in general. And that kind of wraps everything together. And yeah, that would include things like the Nintendo Switch or even the Steam Deck. And we're going to go over all of that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you like it and subscribe if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel. So let's first take a look. I am talking about the ROG Ally from Asus. And this is basically their competitor, or even their answer to the Steam Deck. Handheld gaming, especially on the PC side, is starting to really explode now, especially after the Steam Deck. But even before that, we did have, like, Aya Neo was creating all these handhelds, and they come out with handhelds constantly. There is always a new device from them, seemingly every couple of months almost. The problem we've run into with their devices, despite them being fairly capable, I would say, one, the battery life isn't great, and two, the price point is out of reach for most people to justify. It just is. It's like, hey, this handheld is on par or even somewhat better than the Steam Deck, maybe because it has an OLED screen or it's slimmer, but oh yeah, it's also $1,300 to $1,400. Most people will just say, you know what, I'll live with the things that the Steam Deck does worse technically, and buy that at starting at $400, or even go up to the most expensive model and still pay half the price. So when I see Asus show up with this ROG Ally, it started to turn some heads, but people clearly were more concerned about things like pricing, because Asus was really promising the world here with this thing, and obviously it's their job to pump it up with marketing, but based on some of the pricing and figures that are getting thrown around, it's becoming a bit more enticing, I'll say. But we could see a lot of the features right in front of us here, with the display at 120 hertz, 1920 by 1080. I believe it's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, dual speakers. The micro SD slot is UHS 2, which is nice. It's something that I would expect Nintendo to also move to, regardless of specifications, either way, with their next platform that just opens up the overall transfer speeds of the SD cards, I think, like threefold. So it's like, that's where we are now. Why not? And then you can also see the weight of it at 608 grams, and then some of the configurations with 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 and up to 512 gigabytes of upgradable storage. Again, sounds pretty good. And then you see the AMD Ryzen Z1 series, which we do have benchmarks because AMD started throwing this information around, which is the part that gets me really excited about this entire handheld space, because now that AMD seems extremely invested in this, and maybe it was Valve that really got them thinking about it, because prior to this, they still had mobile chips. They just did not seem as focused or advanced as what they are doing now. And a lot of that probably started with Valve and them kind of working together to engineer the chip for that Steam Deck, because now you see things like the Z1, the Z1 Extreme, the Z1 Extreme promising up to 8.6 teraflops. I mean, that is probably best case scenario where you do not care at all about your battery life. And as I mentioned, teraflops is not the be all end all, especially when there are other things that come into play, specifically memory bandwidth, transfer speeds, all of that can affect things, especially when it comes to the resolution. As that increases, you would see that in some of the benchmarks that they showcase. Certainly struggles a bit there, despite the chip being capable otherwise. And that is something that the AMD engineers have mentioned, that memory transfer speed is something that has to improve over time. And based on the market shifting this way, seems like we could see a big push there as well. But they did compare it to the Switch. Sure. I mean, I like the sources, Wikipedia and all this. We know where the Switch is. We know what it is. And a lot of the games that we see available is from Nintendo and Nvidia, providing a lot to developers when it comes to taking full advantage of that device, as opposed to something like the ROG Ally that will have Windows alongside of it. So it's not going to be as quote unquote down to the metal, as people say, as the Switch is. And again, we'll see what Nvidia comes up with in cooperation with Nintendo for the next one. But some of the benchmarks, examples here include upscaled from 720p with RSR. And I think upscaling is going to be a big part of this going forward. And I would expect that to advance, especially with how we see AI becoming, I mean, that is accelerating almost at a scary pace right now, but that is accelerating quickly, and that would probably play into upscaling techniques in the future as we go along. Basically, they will become better and better as we go. Upscaled from 720p to 1080p, though, for that screen in handheld mode, I mean, you can see some impressive results here with average FPS for things like Forza Horizon 4 taking advantage of that 120 hertz screen, or even Red Dead Redemption 2. While, yes, it is below 60 frames, but then you can move up to the more expensive Z1 Extreme if you do want that 60 frames per second or more experience and pay that extra bit of money for Red Dead Redemption 2 coming in at 72 frames. I know these are on low settings. People will probably play around with them when it's actually out in the wild, and I will admit these benchmarks are probably pumped up by AMD, but still, that's it's pretty interesting to see something like Grand Theft Auto 5 eclipsing 100 frames on a system that's running from a battery. And then the overall build quality of it seems good. This is from Dave2D in his video where he took the back off. This is an engineering sample or a prototype, so it's not finalized, but the fact that they are going with a dual fan setup does give me hope that it will, one, operate at a more manageable temperature and also a more manageable noise level than what we have with the Steamdeck. That, I mean, they've been working with the fan curve, but probably a two fan setup would have been better for them to go with. So I am curious to see how this will perform with thermals and the overall noise levels. The battery will be interesting too, because we can see it's kind of broken up into two pieces. So it will sort of act as almost a counterweight, or just a weight in general, for the bottom. But the battery life is going to be very interesting to see how it turns out here, because people have been questioning that, and according to their marketing and what's been basically said through PR to people like Dave2D is that it would perform at the current level of the Steamdeck at the same battery life, but perform 50% better in terms of performance. So I almost wonder if you're fine with what the Steamdeck's doing now, can you then underclock or turn things down on this even further and get better battery life with it? That's something we'll have to see, but using the newer Z1 chip should yield better results one way or the other. But here's the exciting part. You can see some of the pricing here. This is what's kind of being thrown around right now as leaked pricing for this ROG Ally, and it mostly started to show up on Best Buy's website because they're going to launch this through Best Buy. And in fact, people are still kind of confused on when exactly this thing's coming out, as they have a launch event or just a live stream that's going to happen. And what they're going to do, I guess, is reveal pricing and release date. And it's possible, because it's already showing up on Best Buy's site, I don't want to say they just drop it there and it's just out, but it could come out within that same week, or even like the next day or something like that. And pre-orders could go live shortly after that event happens. So seeing the Z1 256 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes of RAM and all this at $599.9, that's a pretty compelling price. If you line that up to the Steam Deck, from what I remember, 256 gigabytes is like $529, so this would be $70 more. And then the Z1 Extreme, which I know enthusiasts will probably look more towards that just for the added horsepower and all this, 512 gigabytes, same 16 gigabytes of memory, $699. That's $50 more than the highest end Steam Deck. So Asus is actually coming in here with a fairly competitive price, and it will have a lot of the compatibility that comes with Windows, whereas while I like what Valve is doing with their Steam OS, there are limitations there with their overall compatibility. And while I know there are a lot of people who just don't like the idea of Windows, I'm pretty much fine with it, but I would like to see more of a push from Microsoft when it comes to developing Windows, or at least a version of it, a branch of it, for these handheld systems. And it kind of seems like Windows might go that route, because interestingly enough, if you look at the website for this thing, right, we could see it here, and they're of course advertising May 11th. There you go, 10 a.m. Make sure you mark your calendars for that if you're really interested in the ROG Ally. But scrolling down, you can see some of the panel here. The future of gaming is handheld, right? So we have product management director of gaming business unit for Asus. You have the Asus host of ROG Pulse. You have solutions and marketing AMD, and then head of Xbox hardware. Now, part of that slide initially that we looked at does say that it has full compatibility with obviously a lot of Windows applications, including Xbox Game Pass, which for a lot of people, oh wow, that makes this a great buy because now I can play my Xbox games on the go without having to deal with cloud gaming, which is, I mean, very touch and go at best, right? So might be enticing enough for people to just go ahead and pick one of these up to have alongside of their Xbox Series system. And it's something people have been asking for to come to Steam or Steamdeck support for Xbox Game Pass. And the fact that they can leverage Windows 11 here just kind of gives them a bit of a leg up there. But also, if we do see Windows push ahead to have a better setup for these handhelds, ROG Ally and maybe others from Ioneo who will, I assume, get access to this Z1 series processor that will, I'm sure, continue to evolve, that could spell a very interesting future for the handheld PC gaming space. Now, with all this said about the Asus ROG Ally and just the overall handheld gaming space, I think you do still have to look at the Switch, not necessarily competing with any of this stuff, because let's face it, the Switch is on a whole other level with how many systems they've sold, but the underlying technology. AMD is clearly investing heavily in this sector, and Nvidia has been here for a while with their Tegra chips, but this just kind of gives us a window into where technology has progressed since the Switch came out. They used that Tegra chip because it was just there. It was available. It was the best thing there right at the time. Even though it was a chip from 2015, it was still the most capable thing that they could really pick up and use. So now with where we're seeing the market push towards with this technology, Nvidia, they're pretty good at making their own chips. So it does make you think that Nintendo and Nvidia, now that they have a success on their hands, while they might not drop something like the Z1 Extreme at 8.6 teraflops, they could have a nice little upgrade, we'll say, for the current Switch using some of the newer tech as well as Nvidia's upscaling technology. But if nothing else, I'm really excited to see the amount of competition that's really entering this space, because while it's fun to get these powerful GPUs that pull ridiculous amount of wattage and stuff, or get these boxes for the PS5 or the Xbox Series, these consoles you put under your TV that can do some pretty cool visuals for the price. Something about having all of that kind of pushed and forced into this handheld system running off of a battery is kind of fun to see the results. So I would like to see this space continue to evolve, and who knows, maybe we get to a point where the lines are so blurred, maybe it's not even a point in making something other than a hybrid. What a future that would be, wouldn't it? But let me know what you guys think about all of this down below, especially with the pricing for the ROG Ally. If this thing really comes in at $599 with that kind of performance, and we'll say battery life that's on par with the Steam Deck, would you be interested in picking one up? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.